As I said earlier, and last week, as I talked about, especially the book that I'm focusing on for the month of September is this one right here, Grateful: The Transforming Power of Giving Thanks by Diana Butler Bass. And some of you might remember Diana when she came here and spoke, and I shared a little bit with you that she and I went to college together. We got to know each other, taking religious studies courses and things like that, and we've just kind of kept in touch over the years. And I think this is her 10th book, and she has done phenomenally well as an author. And if you would like to read a book about gratitude and what it means to really be thankful in a time that's difficult, which we all face those times, I haven't read a better book on gratitude than this one, and so I definitely recommend Diana's book. One of the things that she talks about in the book is an experience that she had at the college where we both attended. I ended up going to seminary right away and getting a master's degree and was ordained, and she ended up going to Duke University and getting a PhD in religious studies. And I'll tell you, she was good at it. And in fact, she got a job back at the college where we graduated as a professor of religious studies and church history. And she was well loved by the students, and she was, frankly, a great teacher. However, some of her colleagues in the faculty were not extremely kind to her, and she also found some of the expectations a little bit stifling. Some of the expectations regarding personal piety and religious beliefs, things she was told she was supposed to believe that she didn't necessarily believe were true or in her heart the best way to live. And so she struggled a bit for the first few years, and then one day, I think it was year 3 or 4, the president of the college called her into the office and explained to her that it was time to let her go. And she was shocked. She really didn't see it coming. She knew that there was challenges, and he even admitted to her that she was a wonderful professor and that he was very happy with her work, but he said that she just didn't really fit in the particular environment where she and I had gone to college. And she was rather distraught, but there were other things going on in her life, like a divorce, that I'll just say it was a challenging time. But one of the big things in terms of disappointment was that was not an easy time for a woman to find another place at a university or seminary to teach religious studies. And so she was wondering where she was going to go, what she was going to do, what was the rest of her life going to look like. And on top of all of that, most of her social networking was done at the college. And so she basically was saying goodbye to her job. She had no idea what was going to happen to her career. And she all of a sudden kind of lost contact with many, many of her friends that she spent a lot of time with. Well, about a week or so after she was let go, she was with a friend and she was explaining to him what had happened. And during the conversation, well, it went something like this, but during the conversation, she said, "Can you believe him?" The president of the school. "He actually told me that one day I would thank him for this." And she couldn't believe it. It was like, and she said, "The nerve of this guy letting me go after telling me what a great professor I am and then saying one day you'll thank me for this." And her friend just very patiently listened to all that she was saying. And when she was done, he said, "You know, he was right. One day you will thank him." And he went on to explain that he had had a similar situation. And she said, "Well, did you go and thank him?" And he said, "Well, actually, after a while I did, after I learned gratitude." And her response was, "You can learn gratitude?" I think she opens her book describing how gratitude never came easy to her. Even writing Christmas cards or thank you cards for Christmas presents was a struggle for her. It was just one of those things that she felt like, Well, some of us are blessed with musical abilities, some are blessed with gratitude abilities, and I'm just not blessed in that area. But anyway, she talked to her friend and said, gratitude is something, well, she exclaimed, gratitude is something you can learn. And then she asked, how do you do that? And he said to her, just tell me right now one thing you're grateful for. And she wasn't feeling very grateful for anything at that moment. And finally she said, okay, my friend Julie. I'm grateful for Julie. And he said, there you go. What I want you to do every day is write down one thing you're grateful for. Whether you feel like doing it or not, just pause every day, think about something you're grateful for, and write it down. So in the book, Diana talks about having a gratitude journal where every single day she would write down at least one thing she was grateful for, and she talks about what a struggle that was on some days, being jobless and seemingly friendless and not having any idea what she was going to do with her career, on and on and on. And every day she would write down until she thought of one thing she was grateful for. And then eventually it kind of became a pattern. And then 2 or 3 things on certain days. And pretty soon it grew. And, she kept that journal for 3 years. And she learned gratitude. She learned to say thank you and think about a particular blessing that she had, even when she wasn't feeling particularly grateful. There's a couple quotes that she wrote in the book that I thought would be particularly helpful for me just to read, mainly because I couldn't remember all these words on my own. But after she wrote about this particular experience of writing in her gratitude journal for 3 years, she wrote these words: a larger narrative emerged. What had begun as a period of difficult personal crisis wound up being a time of profound happiness, deepened courage, and new self-awareness. Diana reminds her readers that gratitude is not just a feeling you have. You can actually express gratitude without feeling it at all. And you can actually look at the blessings you have, even if you're not feeling grateful for them. And do you know that over time, if you just keep thinking about your blessings, you begin to feel grateful? So Diana talks about that a little bit and also distinguishes between techniques and practices. In other words, a technique, she said, is something that you do. It's prescribed so that you can learn how to do something. A practice is something that you do over time that's more fully committed, and it becomes who you are. And she goes on to say that gratitude isn't just what you do, it's who you become by being grateful. As she tries to explain, or as she does explain the difference between technique and practice, she talks about how when she was growing up, her mother taught her the techniques of cooking. And in fact, there were certain things that she lists in the book, and I thought about it. It's true, you can learn how to cook by learning certain techniques. And she said, I learned to cook because my mother taught me the techniques. But then something happened, and I learned practices. I watched cooking shows. I studied books about cooking. I tried new things. And cooking wasn't just something I did just to put food on the table. It became a passion. It became what I love to do. And as I was reading about this, as Diana was writing about it, it made me think about how that very same thing happened to me, because my grandmother, who used to live here on Kauai, many of you know the story of how she had a degree in home economics from Montana State University, as well as a degree in agriculture, and she spent most of her career teaching women how to cook and other things, nutrition and other things that were important to the health of the family. But my grandmother knew all the techniques, and she also learned to practice, and some of those techniques turned into practices, and she loved cooking. It wasn't something that she just did to put food on the table. It was an art form. It brought her so much immense joy. And she began doing this on Native American Indian reservations in northern Montana. She lived in a place called Polson at the south end of Flathead Lake, and she basically spent years helping Native American women with cooking and health and nutrition. And she also learned a lot from them as well. And then she ended up on the big island of Hawaii and was living in the plantation camps, actually with the people that lived in the camps. And she taught the women of those camps in Kohala the same types of things. And then she moved here to Kauai, and for about 10 years, from 49 to 59, she did that very same thing throughout the entire island of Kauai. And then she went to northern India and did that. And by the time she retired in 1961, I was just about a year old at the time, and she moved to Palo Alto, really close to where my family had settled from Hawaii. And do you know, she loved having her grandchildren come over to her house and learn to cook. And for me, it wasn't just the techniques, although she taught me how to use a measuring cup, a measuring spoon, the difference between measuring solids versus liquids, and on and on. She instilled something within me that was so much far beyond just the techniques of cooking. She shared with me her love of cooking and how it had become a part of her and how she loved entertaining for family and friends. And she just poured her love into meal preparation. And I know some of you here can relate to that because I've had some of your cooking. And over the last couple of weeks while I've been recuperating from my leg surgery, I've enjoyed so many meals that love has just been poured into. I got that also from my grandmother, and one of my favorite memories of her, she had spent some time in Switzerland and learned to cook Swiss fondue. And as a little kid, that was one of my favorite things in the world, especially those long forks that you could poke things with and stick them in, different things. But anyway, her specialty was Swiss fondue, and she taught me not only how to put the ingredients in and measure them, but to test it for just the perfect flavor and consistency. And when I had my grandmother's Swiss fondue, I felt like I was eating pure love. It was just amazing. Well, Diana Butler Bass says that gratitude is like that as well. You can do the techniques. You can write your one thing in a journal, and you can start to feel a little bit of gratitude over time. But she talks about this thing called extravagant gratitude and how gratitude can actually become a part of you. You can exude gratitude. When people look at you, they're grateful too just because you are. She talks about just how important it is to allow gratitude to become who you are, for you to be gratitude. In today's gospel lesson from the Gospel of Mark, I first read that and thought, gee, what am I going to do with this? Jesus goes to the house of a leper. This lady puts perfume on him, and then he gets ready to die. I mean, it was just like, well, what am I going to say about this? But as I kept reading the scripture over and over and over, it occurred to me that this passage is truly all about extravagant gratitude. So let me set up the scenario for you. Just as you begin reading that passage, we're told that the feast of Passover and the feast of unleavened bread is just about to happen. And if you're not aware of what those feasts are, in the ancient Hebrew tradition, the feast of the Passover was this amazing celebration that the Jewish people would have because God freed them from bondage. It goes all the way back to their history in Egypt, and it is kind of like how we celebrate Thanksgiving, but much deeper than that even. They have a Seder meal, and there's all these parts of the meal, and different parts represent different things in that Exodus story. And there's bitter herbs to talk about the bitterness of their slavery in Egypt, and then there's all these different things that express the joy, the hope, the things that happened on their journey so that they could end up in a place, in a land that was free for them. So Passover was this basically celebration of gratitude for not just individuals, but for all the people. And the Feast of the Unleavened Bread is just like that, except it focuses in particular on the urgency to leave your bondage and end up in a place of freedom. And that's what happened in the Exodus story. So the Jewish people, or the Hebrew people, knew that they were in bondage, and all of a sudden they get this message from Moses, or from God through Moses, it's time to leave your bondage. And once the decision had been made, the urgency was set in place, and freedom needs to begin now. In fact, you don't even have time for your bread to rise. Don't even put the yeast in, because there's not going to be time. Freedom is now. It's time to move forward. Grab the bread, throw it in the oven, and let's move on. Time for freedom. And so these two festivals were really all about freedom and thanksgiving. Well, in the story in Mark, however, the dark shadow is that Jesus is about to be betrayed and arrested, and he's going to die. And Mark informs us that Jesus knows that. And so in this strange irony where there's this wonderful celebration just about to happen, we find out that Jesus is about to die. And I can't think of anything worse than just knowing your end is near and it's going to be painful. It's going to be hard. But then this tender moment of gratitude happens that just kind of explodes into extravagant gratitude. Jesus is in the house of Simon. Now, this isn't Simon the apostle. This is Simon the leper. And frankly, we don't know anything in all the scriptures about this particular Simon, except that he had leprosy, and he lived in a house, and there was enough room for entertaining, and there was a woman there who apparently was very wealthy. So most likely, Simon was a wealthy person. Now, since Jesus didn't heal him of his leprosy while he was there, or even any talk about the leprosy, the basic premise of the people that would have read or heard the Gospel of Mark for the first time, they would have thought Jesus has already healed him of leprosy. And if you know anything about leprosy, it's always been a horrible disease, but in those days, if you had leprosy, you were an outcast. You couldn't even talk to family members and friends in their presence. You had to keep your distance. You couldn't go to the temple and worship. You had to stay away. In other words, you were abandoned by God and your family and your business associates, and on and on and on. And the premise here is that Jesus most likely already healed Simon from leprosy. And then this unnamed woman shows up in the room with an alabaster jar filled with pure nard. Now, alabaster would have been a more expensive container, and pure nard, the way Mark describes it, this was like really, really, really expensive perfume. And he even goes on to say later in the passage that it was worth 300 denarii. Now, 300 denarii is probably about a year's worth of wages. So think about whatever you make in a given year, and you're going to just extravagantly express your gratitude to Jesus by pouring that on his head. Now, nard was used not only as a perfume, but a form of anointing. And in the Jewish tradition, you anointed people when they were born, if there was something new that they were taking on, like a new position, or if they were about to die, or if they had already just died, you would anoint the body. And in Jesus' mind, this woman was anointing him, preparing him for his death. And somehow there's this unsaid knowledge of this that was going on in the room. But this lady extravagantly gives this incredible gift to Jesus, and the other people in the room condemn her. They think, well, how dare she waste this on Jesus when she could have used the money to give to the poor? And there's a part of me that gets that. I mean, if I had a whole year's worth of wages, I'm probably not going to spend it on perfume doing anything with it in here, or I'm sorry for those of you that love perfume, but I probably wouldn't pour perfume on your head anyway. But if it costs that much money, I'm just not going to do that. But Jesus condemns the condemners because he says she's doing a beautiful act. She's preparing me for what is to come. Now, many of you know that I did professional stewardship consulting and fundraising consulting for about 6 years for a firm in Dallas, and then I did it on my own when I had my own consulting company. And as a church pastor, I know that a big part of my job is fundraising and stewardship development. And so, I'll just tell you that over the years, I've seen many times when somebody was extravagantly grateful and generous, and somebody else condemned them for that, saying, gee, well, if I would have had their money, here's what I would have done. And you know what Jesus says about that? Leave her alone. You have no idea what's going on in her life. If it's your money, you get to do what you want with it. If it's her money, she gets to do what she wants with it. It's nobody else's business. That's the message that I get, at least. And you know what? I love this story because so many times we think about the rich versus the poor. What we have going on in this story in terms of the protagonist, which is this woman, and the antagonists, which are the chief priests and the scribes, you've got two groups of very wealthy people. So in the story, Mark talks about the chief priests and the scribes, who are basically the ones that are celebrating this big Thanksgiving feast called Passover and unleavened bread. They are preparing to kill Jesus. They're celebrating freedom and Thanksgiving, but they're going to kill the one who brings that to them. There's the irony. On the other hand, you have this woman who is extremely wealthy, because there's no way she's even going to own that kind of jar with that kind of ointment in it if she doesn't have tons of money. And she decides to give this extravagant gift to Jesus. That's her way of worshiping God. And Jesus says to the people that condemn her, let her do it. Let her do it. As I've thought over the years of the churches where I've pastored and the churches and religious organizations where I've consulted, I've always encouraged people not to think about what everybody else wants you to do with your money, or what other people are doing with their money, or their time, or their treasures. Think about what brings you joy. Think about what would be an appropriate and wonderful and life-affirming thing for you to do with your life, which includes your money, but it also includes all the time that you have left on this earth. It also includes every gift that God has given you that you can share with others. Think about that. And let go of all the expectations, what you think somebody else might do with their stuff. Let go of all the ideas of what people might condemn you for, and ask yourself, what would bring you incredible joy? And go and do that. Just real briefly, as I close, I want you to know that when I first came here as the pastor, I took a look at this beautiful church, and I knew that one thing that I wanted to give to the church, if the church wanted it, was a nice cross. And the 2 days after I moved into the parsonage, we found out that my mom didn't have much time left. Within 2 months, she was gone. My dad had died years before that, and we didn't really do a memorial service. It wasn't the wish of my siblings, and I felt I wanted to express gratitude not only to my parents and remember their legacy, but I also wanted to express my gratitude to this church for calling me as your pastor, for affirming me and my gifts. And, I called my good friend Caroline Miura, and we sat down, I think, at the Kalaheo Cafe, and I said, I want to donate a Koa cross to the church in memory of my mom and dad. What should I do? And she said, my really good friend Frank Polano is the person to talk to. And Frank is the one that designed this cross up here. And I'll just tell you, giving that cross, I felt like it was a gift to God more than anything else, but a gift to my parents, a gift to this church. It brought me so much joy, and yes, it was extravagant for me. I usually don't spend that kind of money even on myself, but I thought, what can I do that would just bring me lots of joy, that would feel so good to me? And, as I thought about what that cross costs and the time and love that went into it, it was so worth it. And I never once thought, well, should I give money to the poor? Because I do that anyway. Should I give money to my son that might need it while he's in college? Well, I do that anyway. I just thought, my mom left me some money when she died. And that was money from my parents. And I thought, what would bring me just great joy? How can I show extravagant gratitude to God? And it really was this cross. And at the time, I just can't tell you the feeling I had when I walked into this church the first time that cross was up there. And every single time I come into this church, I just feel my mom and dad's presence, God's loving presence, the love of all of you. I would invite you to think about what you might do with extravagant gratitude. And it doesn't need to be something financial even. How might you express something to God, to your spouse, or your significant other, or your parent, or grandparent, or child, or grandchild, the church, whatever? What might you do that would just give you great joy and make you feel so very, very good and so aware of all of your blessings? There are all sorts of ways to do that.